Chevron's return to Venezuela continues as the hot topic in local economics and politics. Exiles monetize income by speaking horrible claims about Chevron. They usually beg Donald Trump's government to revoke newly conceded petroleum license. We should also remember that about a month ago, an additional license was also provided for gas exploration, which should promote cooperation between Venezuela, Trinidad and Tobago, and Guyana for development of Plataforma del Tana and Mariscal Sucre Paria gas fields, along with a number of Trinidad and Guyana offshore deposits in what is probably the hottest oil and gas region in the planet. Nevertheless, Venezuelan journalists in exile pretend to make a living, forcing Venezuelans not to have any living. They are determined to starve the Venezuelan population because if they cannot gain power by any means, this country should cease to exist. Fortunately, this radical thinking is quickly becoming outdated as Venezuelans within the country who are expecting our oil production to increase are buoyant with the news that Chevron and Valero Energy in the United States have signed agreements for refining Petroboscan crude coming from southern Zulia state fields into refineries in the Gulf of Mexico. This deal will allow Chevron to export oil from Venezuela to nearby Aruba Island, where ship-to-ship transfers will be conducted by Valero Energy, which will distribute Venezuelan crude among Gulf of Mexico refineries in Louisiana and Texas. Meanwhile, in neighboring Guyana, the presidential elections are taking heat, and we see candidates in meetings telling voters to vote for them, emphasizing the shortcomings of the candidates they wish to defeat. Business as usual in every electoral campaign in the planet. Back in Venezuela, we are highly concerned with the rise of the waters at the Orinoco River, as it has rained a lot in the Andes Mountains in both Colombia and Venezuela, which provide much of the water that ultimately ends up in Orinoco. Years of mismanagement in Venezuela have provoked a catastrophe in Apure, Guárico, and Bolívar states. When we speak about developing the Orinoco oil belt fields, we should recognize that water treatment and flood mitigation strategies must also be implemented, adding to the huge cost of such a project. And we also hear from Chile that El Teniente mine collapsed, killing 6 miners. The international community should definitely take a look on mining practices in Chile, because it seems that these accidents are occurring more often than in other locations around the world. Responsible mining and responsible oil production should be the priority of all South American countries. We need to incorporate stringent environmental and safety measures when we provide licenses to companies to extract our natural resources. This is possible. All of our countries have educated populations that can take care of this organization, and we are no longer in the situation of the early 20th century, where most people were illiterate and companies came and went as they pleased. However, due to corruption or a mentality of a quick profit, many of these recommendations are neglected. President Gustavo Petro of Colombia is funny. He says that carbon should not be exploited in Colombia because it will provide a lot of pollution and it will destroy the environment. His extreme view is not shared by anyone else, and Colombia is actually worried because of the drug addiction and alcoholism sickness that Gustavo Petro has, which is a theme that will probably be exploited in the forthcoming election campaign, which will start right after Guyana chooses its next president and regional authorities. Brazil will also have elections in 2026, and we will see if the opposition will be able to regain power, as President Lula is known for inventing tricks to have his party stay in power. It looks like developing harmoniously the natural resources of South American countries requires a great deal of understanding of political systems in each country and understanding the ideologies and proposals of conflicting factions. Because if you think in the long term, the most likely situation is that in any given country, within a few years, there will be a majority of one party and the remaining years will be the other party. However, what seems to be a highlight of this historical period of time is that conflicting factions in all countries are very adverse, which pollutes the discourse and makes all calculations more expensive, as more must be allocated for security, defense on fruitless lawsuits, and the inefficiency of governments all across the political spectrum, as they all need to deal with oppositions that will do their most to block whatever the current government is doing. Therefore, it is understandable that multinational corporations contribute politically to conflicting parties because they need to be in good grace with anyone who gets into power anywhere. Otherwise, it would be impossible to conduct business in the most attractive locations in the planet in regards to their natural resources. However, the Venezuelan case is extreme, because what used to be the opposition that fortunately did not get any single of their constituents in a municipality because they chose to abstain, now they want to destroy Venezuelan petroleum industry and destroy Chevron. So we must double the discourse and again ask ExxonMobil to return. A return of ExxonMobil into Venezuela is possible and desirable. We have so much oil that probably Chevron, Eni, Repsol, Videsh, and Morel and Prom combined could not allocate completely among themselves due to the huge investment as the water canalization projects along the Orinoco River just described to prevent that in future rainy seasons the tragedy in Apure, Guárico, and Bolívar repeats. ExxonMobil and Chevron will develop together Yellowtail and Stabroek offshore fields in Guyana, deep water oil and gas fields in Trinidad, and since Chevron is already at the Orinoco Belt and ExxonMobil used to be at Cerro Negro Orinoco Belt less than 2 decades ago, all should return to normal. It would be a huge territory with the greatest reserves of oil in the planet, jointly managed by all transnationals working together in this area of the world while competing elsewhere, which will probably redefine the oil and gas industry. We have also heard that British Petroleum is working in Santos oil fields in Brazil, not too far from Rio de Janeiro shore, which means that within a few years, South America should regain a position of importance in the global oil market. Since conventional oil and gas exploration is proving so successful in so many places, it is an unknown if unconventional shale oil production will stall or be reduced. We remember that Drill Baby Drill was a campaign promise of Donald Trump, and now as he goes into his presidency, rather than Drill Baby Drill, he is granting oil licenses for Chevron to produce more cheaply and more environmentally consciously in Venezuela. Zulia state journalists have confirmed that social programs in education and culture promoted by Chevron are significant. So we would look forward for this kind of community investment to be reinstated. The Bolivar, the Venezuelan currency, during the interim that Chevron was without a license, suffered a significant depreciation. However, there are signs that the Bolivar will slowly stabilize as fresh dollars coming into the Venezuelan petroleum industry come back into the market. While cash payments are prohibited by the new license from Chevron to the Venezuelan government, barter for diluents and the possibility of the Venezuelan oil selling a significant portion of Chevron's produce into our most reliable markets in Asia, such as India and China, we should expect income to be available for our battered economy. The terrorism campaign of journalists in exile who are threatening to stop oil industry in Venezuela and have us all starve must be denounced, because it is a crime to exit your country and lobby for continued economic hardship to your own relatives and friends. Unfortunately, politics tends to radicalize people, and often they lose rational powers. In recent shows, I talked to you about a project I am designing of roads, pipelines, and rebuilding of refineries in ports all over South America, Central America, and the Caribbean. Every time I speak about it to anyone, they get a contradiction because they think it's impossible, but they like the idea as if it were only theoretical, but it's practical. The only way to make it completely practical is to continue making calculations that are in the process of being made, as many variables are being considered. The process could be a little faster, but it has slowed down because I realized that my website, rroopstr.com.ve, needed SEO, search engine optimization improvements, which I was unaware of, and my immediate focus is deploying rroopstr.com.ve in such a way that it will be acceptable for search engines, so that contents can be made available more often in web searches. Most of the content are political discussions from 2022, 2023, 2024, and early 2025, as the recent migration into the Avanza Roads project started in the second half of 2025. And a lot of that project is still being handled privately, as I am disclosing small widgets at a time. I thought that I could devote exclusively to the economic project, but it seems that the political part continues being tantamount, because only making Guyana and Venezuela agree on anything will be gigantic. And of course, there are Bolivia, Paraguay, Chile, and Argentina in line, also waiting for their part to be published. But we will get there eventually. And eventually means within a few weeks or maximum a few months. For the end of this year, the project should be completed in such a way that we can start actively visiting possible investors and stakeholders. Meanwhile, what must be stressed out every day is that all countries in South America deserve a union and a combined policy for exploiting our natural resources, with an emphasis on electrical generation and downstream industries, so that we export finished products rather than only raw materials. Thanks for subscribing to this challenging unification strategy for all the Americas.